Hello, everyone. This is Keith Stone with the Center for Hellenic Studies, and I'm here with Gregory Nagy, our guest of honor today in the Cosmos Society Online Open House Series. And Greg, you need no introduction. You're the director of the center that is our sponsor, and you've been our guest many times. And today you're going to talk with us about Sappho, your recent thoughts about Sappho. And I wanted to ask you a question about that. I know that you began this adventure with Sappho, the most recent stage of it, with someone named Paula Silentiarios.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how you came to be reading this fellow, or why you chose him as your starting point.
Well, this person is so late that for some people he would be a figure of early Byzantine traditions, and why not? He was the Silentiarius for the Emperor Justinian, which means when Justinian entered a public event, he would be the person who would silence everybody. The emperor is here. And he was obviously a very important political figure in Constantinople. And what I find amazing about this 6th century personality is, in many ways, he seems to understand what I think is going on in the poetics of Sappho, as if he were a millennium earlier. And he talks about the sensuality of Sappho's words without being crude, and without exhibiting some of the typical habits that happen when a male reader reads an art form that was, in its earliest phases, functioning for women and girls. And when I say women and girls, I'm simply making the anthropological distinction of people who are married and people who are not yet married. I mean, female people. So that's how I started, and it's very romantic. It talks about soft kisses and embraces of limbs, and it's pretty much it for details. So it's certainly not, by Hollywood standards, anything that's even PG, let alone R or N. What's the worst category? Whatever it is, NC, no children. So that's my short answer. I could go on forever, but then what I did was I sort of went backwards. What fascinated me about Paulus Silentiarius, if I'm right, is he may have read all sorts of poetry that was influenced by Sappho, but I think he still had access to the original, which of course we unfortunately do not, with the exception of a couple of songs that are totally or almost totally attested, and with some pretty nice new fragments which add up to almost like maybe 1 or 2 extra songs, but that's still a very, very small representation of what the ancient world had. And it's, for me as a classicist, one of our biggest losses that such a great figure in the evolution of ancient Greek verbal art should come down to us only in bits and pieces.
Mm-hmm. Well, so much for Paulus, I think. I know that you want to talk a bit with a bit more focus on Catullus today.
Yeah. Well, and I can make it very simple, which is that there's a very famous poem by Catullus, number 2, where the poet's voice is addressing a little sparrow. You know, nothing to write home about, you would think. And it describes, this poem does, the intimate relationship that a girl called Lesbia, and I say girl because the operative word is puella. And I say a girl called Lesbia because Lesbia is what this personality is called in the poems of Catullus, meaning woman from Lesbos or girl from Lesbos. In any case, there's this relationship between girl and sparrow. Sparrow is a pet, and the whole idea in the poem, this is Catullus 2, is that how this lovelorn man, would love to be able to get into the kind of relationship that this very complex woman has with a very simple little bird. And how come they seem to be getting along better than I'm getting along with this woman, this girl.
We
So,
have the poem handy. I wonder if you would mind reading it. I know that it's a short one.
ooh,
Sarah, would you be able to present it? And
okay. I will need to see.
so
I
it should be
sort
coming
of
up in a
remember it,
moment.
but it'll be good to have a little
It's
prompt. Oh, there it is. There it is. So,
so that's in Latin.
okay. Do you want me to
But
read it in Latin or my
maybe the English,
translation?
I would say.
Okay. So,
Let's
dear
give that
Sarah, if you could, there you go.
there we go.
You sparrow, delight for my girl. And delight, I like that word because I think of Italian diletto. I think of the idea that you don't have to be an expert to take pleasure and get happy about something. And girl is puella, to play with you, to hold you in her lap, to offer for you the tip of her finger as you open wide for it, and to tease out from you those sharp pickings. That is her habit, to do those things whenever she, that glowing object of my desire, feels like having fun with, I don't know, what is near and dear to her and is a comfort for her pain, I guess, so that afterwards the heaviness of her burning passion can ease up. Um, you, sparrow, to be playful with you the same way she is, if I could only be able, and to lighten the cares of my heart. And I'm going to stop there at line 10. Um, when you read this in the Latin, um, it just starts with passer, meaning sparrow, and it takes a while for us to figure out, as the words carry us along, that the whole thing, the whole 10 lines that I've tried to render here, that whole thing is an I, male speaker, addressing you, a male addressee who's a sparrow, talking about my girl, third person, who is Lesbia, and otherwise the girl. And then there's a huge debate about whether the next three lines are really part of this or not part of this. But I want to concentrate how I had a really hard time trying to give people the impression that all along in these 10 lines, it's I, male speaker, addressing a sparrow, a male addressee, and talking about my girl, who is third person, and who is the puella, or if you like, lesbia, or if you like, Sappho. And what excites me as I look at this afresh is that all along I just assumed that Catullus makes up this situation from scratch, so to speak. That he he is thinking about a real pet that his real girlfriend has. But now, after all these years, I'm thinking that Sappho herself, can I put it that way, had a pet sparrow. and that what you have here is an engagement with that original pet sparrow, whether a contemporary girlfriend has a pet sparrow or not. I think I see that, and that makes it much more exciting for me, because it's as if I've just happened upon a new poem of Sappho, except that everything is turned upside down, in the sense that now it's a male speaker, not a female speaker, as in a poem attributed, as in a song attributed to Sappho, addressed to her sparrow. Well, I thought I could say that faster. I'm sorry I didn't.
That's all right. I have a quick question. You mentioned Lesbia, the character or figure of Lesbia, as
Yes.
the third person, I think, you described
Yes.
her as in this poem. The name Lesbia doesn't appear here, so this is kind of a basic question. So forgive me for that, but how do you make that connection?
No. The connection is made after you read these poems of Catullus, poems attributed to Catullus, dozens of times, hundreds of times, and it's pretty clear that there's a kind of grid, a kind of network where Lesbia equals Puella in some situations. Of course, what makes it exciting is sometimes this female personality from the island of Lesbos is pictured either as a girl, and I already defined what I mean by girl, or as a woman, I mean a married woman, and I've already mentioned that. So that would mean that what are two distinct personalities in the songs of Sappho, and I think I can show that even independently on the basis of just the words that are attributed to Sappho. But certainly in Catullus, there are two different roles. There's the female personality from Lesbos as a woman or as a girl. We've already discussed the word for girl. Did I say it that way? The word that we translate as girl, which is puella, and then the word that we would translate as woman would be matrona, matron. And she can be both. She can kind of switch on and off. I think in Catullus as well as in Sappho. If that's provocative, maybe we can stop there and see if people have reactions.
Yeah. Are there any questions at this point? I know, Greg, you have a couple of other poems we can talk about, but it's always good to pause.
Yeah.
Sarah.
So, Greg, thinking about the poems of Sappho and the original context in which they were performed, was some sort of ritual or sacred context, and there's a lot of invocation of gods or people who are perhaps part of the chorus. And I was thinking about what you say in the ancient Greek hero in hour 14 about that longing, and so I wondered whether there was a sort of appropriation almost of the language, that erotic language of love, when it's actually addressed at something sacred, or vice versa. And in particular, I was thinking about the sparrow, because we were looking at a poem of Sappho where Aphrodite's chariot is drawn by sparrows.
Yes. One thing about the sacred is that when you and I think about the sacred, it has to be dead serious. It has to be elevated in its humanism and so on and so forth. But the sacred is so much more flexible in the ancient world, and it includes opportunities for lightheartedness, for, may I put it this way, just having fun, but within still a framework that is sanctioned by the immortals. I'll put it that way. And not only that, in the case of Sappho, um, I hesitate to say original, but the earliest possible context for understanding how um, songs attributed to Sappho were performed. The earliest reconstructible context is what we can call shorthand the chorus. And by chorus, of course, I don't mean an ensemble of singers only. It's singers and dancers. And in many situations, the dancing predominates over the singing. So what I'm saying is things can be deeply personal and yet also um, collective. Um, Expressions of collective experience. And here I love the way Claude Calam talks about, especially female choruses, that there is, if I can put it this way, let's see if I can raise my hand, yes, a horizontal axis of solidarity. And you think of people, let's say girls in the same age class, going through similar emotional experiences and experimentations with what is love. So there's that horizontal axis of solidarity, but there's always a vertical axis of hierarchy. And what's always at work is some kind of presence of somebody who's older, more experienced, um, um, and precisely because they're older and more experienced, are more admired than the peers. And that's what a chorus is all about. And you see it very clearly in female choruses. I do recommend, even if you're starting from scratch, reading the book of Claude Calam, Calame, which is luckily on the CHS website, a very pretty English translation, where after reading that, you really think of Sappho's songs as a perfect example of, what shall I call it, sentimental education of 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 young females as they progress from girlhood into womanhood, and I include old age in womanhood, the whole spectrum. And maybe this is the time for me to insert that about 5, 6, 7 years ago, I figured out, and I really think I'm right, that the etymology of the name Sappho should be something endearing, something that has to do with the bonds that happen among girls and women, that come closest to what we would call sisterhood. It doesn't have to be um, uh, genetic sisterhood, but notional sisterhood. And and a, a, an articulation of the world in language that is especially compatible with, understandable for girls and women. And I think that's what Sappho is about. And I think Sappho's name does mean sister, or more generally, a kind of um, hypochoristic. By hypochoristic, I mean a pet name, the way in the American South, some women are called sissy, and it's both endearing and kind of special, and compatible with people who understand each other maybe better than what shall we call them, the outsiders.
And that would be sissy as a shorthand for the word sister, you're saying.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yes,
right,
and,
right.
and there's the name Sissy Spacek, for example, who's a noted actor. But it can also be thing. I'm saying it doesn't have to be sister. It could be thing. It can be. We can translate it in like dearest or dear or various terms of endearment.
There's a question from YouTube that I'll pose here, Greg. It goes, would it be possible that Catullus' Lesbia is actually referring to Sappho herself, like the poetic muse and poetic predecessors?
Wow. This person says it better than I did. That was saying pretty much what I want to argue. So that question, I would say, is a wonderful thesis, and I subscribe to it. Except it took this person just a couple of sentences, and it took me several minutes.
Well, how about these other poems that we brought along today in our kit? I see poem 51 of Catullus,
Yes.
31 of Sappho.
Yes.
And I know those go together.
Yeah, well,
very closely.
They go very closely. Could I just say where I think I'm an outlier in the classics world, and that is when I read Sappho 31, to me that's a wedding song. I just can't imagine any other situation. And a lot of people would make a whole variety of different hypotheses. So you got to be patient with me that I'm already starting with a fairly well-defined context, which is the way I see it, at least. There's a wedding, there's a bride and the groom, and unlike the more orientalizing ways of doing things in Eastern Greek society, they're seated, not reclining on a couch, and I see them in the context of a wedding feast, and if you like, I see them in the context of the moment when people get married, and and just to push it a little bit further, I see this happy couple as being so charismatic at the moment that that they're being viewed by the song. They're so charismatic that they are literally equal to gods. And I think the gods that come closest generically would be Aphrodite in the case of the bride and Ares in the case of the bridegroom. Now, I know that Ares can be scary and negative in other contexts, but let's face it, he's a terrific dancer, he's a great lover. All of these things we know, for example, in Odyssey 8 very clearly. So he has very, very, very attractive sides. And even the epithet, which we translate as swift when we read epic, like the epic of the Iliad, in a situation like this, you could tweak it a little bit and say not swift, but how's this? Dashing. I like the fact that dashing actually means rushing like the wind, and it has all of these martial sub meanings. But I'm emphasizing that he's just very attractive. And after all, if Aphrodite, the goddess of sexuality and love, really falls for this character as she does, and again I go back to Odyssey 8, he must be pretty irresistible at the right moments. And so there I see in Sappho 31 the bridegroom and the bride, Ares and Aphrodite, and they're just exuding charisma, and they're preoccupied with each other. And then there's this voice that is looking at them. I mean, the owner of the voice is looking at them. And if you like, let's go through the three persons of conjugating a verb or declining a pronoun. I, you, he, she, it, they. So the I, the first person, is the speaker, or shall we say, the persona who is embodied in the voice, and the voice is saying what the persona is seeing. So that's I. Then you, well, that's the bride. And then he, the third person. So second person, you, is the bride. Third person, he is the bridegroom. And then
I wonder if we can show the text of the poem
sure,
while you're talking about
sure,
it so closely.
sure.
This would be Sappho, Song 31 in the English translation.
Yes, yes.
If you have that, Sarah.
Sarah's wonderful.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, so there's the he, and then next thing you know, there's you. And so the he is the bridegroom, you is the bride, and then the I, as in my heart flutters, and I look at you. You see, the moment I look at you, then for me to make any sound at all, and then there's this whole cavalcade of impressions of emotional and even physical reactions, and then at the end, a little short of death, do I appear to myself? And I think it's very important that in the first line, appears, that seems to be the more surface meaning of the word, at least when you first look at it. But then when you see the same word, and now it's the I who is saying, I appear to myself to be short of breath. Now it's now we start seeing that the whole setup is not only impressions. Oh, they look like Aphrodite and Ares, but they're epiphanies of Aphrodite and Ares. They're like the physical manifestations. Why? Because in ancient Greek ritual, at the climax of the ritual, the person who is being initiated into, in this case, marriage, it actually assumes the identity of the model for this charismatic moment. So the bridegroom is Ares, the bride is Aphrodite. And so what about us? And I look at the I here as not only an individualized experiencer of emotions and feelings in general, that whom we call Sappho. I think of the I as speaking on behalf of the whole occasion. Well, anyway, I apologize that I have this fairly focused interpretation of 31, which will make things very different for me when I look at Catullus 51. So, dear Sarah, if you happen to have that, there, oh, I see. Yeah, it was almost there. One more. There, I see it. So here, okay, now it's Catullus who is the I, not Sappho. Can I put it that way?
And this is not a wedding, is it, in this case?
This is no wedding. This is, and why should Catullus think that Sappho 31 is a wedding? I think so because I worked eternities on comparing Sappho 31 with not just every bit and piece of other songs attributed to Sappho, but every bit and piece of Greek literature in general. And I'm not expecting Catullus to have as shall we say, focused a view of what the hell is going on. I think for Catullus, it's just a very good-looking guy, a very good-looking girl, and then a very conflicted ego who is taking it all in and is feeling jealous about the happiness of the girl, or I don't know, maybe happiness of the boy, or maybe the happiness of both of them. So whatever. I do think that Catullus has a much wider view of Sappho 31 than I do. No matter. I'm still saying that here we have that man. Okay. He's not the bridegroom, but he's just an attractive man. Let's see where we take it from there. And then there's a you, and it's pretty clear that the you is female. But it really only becomes clear at lines 6 to 7 to 8. For as soon as you, lesbia, have come into my view, there's nothing left for me to, and then there's a blank. And he clearly loses his voice, he loses self-control. But I think here's the difference, is that if this were just a literal-minded translation of Sappho 31, then the you would not be the girl, who in 31 is the bride. It would be the first person speaker, the one who gets all the emotional symptoms of love. So I'm saying there's a really serious displacement here, because the you here is Sappho. And if we were just doing a translation of 31, if Catullus were only doing a translation of 31, then this is the wrong person.
So Catullus is kind of addressing Sappho using her own whole poem.
Exactly.
In a way.
Exactly. So there goes all that discussion about is this a successful translation? Well, it's not a translation at all. It's turning things inside out.
And he's talking to Sappho about that man.
And then the question is, okay, so he's certainly not a bridegroom. He's obviously some cute guy who is a rival of Catullus, but a rival, interestingly, not for the second person girl of Sappho 31, but a rival lover for the first person, may we say, woman of Sappho 31. You see what I'm saying? So the love object is different. It's not the cute girl who is pictured in 31 at the beginning, in Sappho 31. Well, then who is he? And here's where, dear Sarah, if you could go to poem 50 of Catullus. There we go. Thank you. And so this person, Licinius, the way we know him as a figure, as a real person in real Roman history, is Calvus. So here's a moment where Catullus and Calvus are having a lot of fun, just riffing poetry, and by doing it, they're otiosi. They're engaging in how shall I say it, pleasurable leisure. And we played a lot, line 2, we played a lot. So I like that, because then in that series of essays that I wrote, and each one has the beginning of the title Homo ludens, which is the pseudo-scientific way of referring to humanity as playful, a human being as a player, as a playful one. So here are two homines ludentes, two playful persons, and playing at one, apparently composing love poetry. So I think, and this is the short version of Greg's take, that in a sense, anybody can have the ambition, if they have poetic ambitions, of loving not Lesbia, so to speak, but Sappho for her own songs, and doing so by showing that, hey, I've internalized this. I can sing it in such a way that I appropriate the persons in different ways. I can rearrange who is the I, who is the you, who is the he or she. And that's what's happening here. So now, dear Sarah, if we can go back to Catullus 51, which comes right after this thing. I think those Latinists who think that man is Calvus, I think are onto something. He's saying this rival poet is a rival lover of Sappho, or shall we say it more correctly, of Sappho's songs. And that means that the last stanza, 13, 14, 15, 16, where we yet talk about otium, Catullus talks about otium and mentions it 3 times, bang, bang, bang. That pleasurable leisure is exactly what was going on when the 2 homines ludentes, the 2 playful humans, were practicing how to do love poetry with Sappho's songs themselves as the ultimate love object. There, I said it. But as I say, I have to apologize that I think in real life we have to start with something much more narrow in Sappho 31. But we also have to be aware of reception history. And certainly by the time of Catullus, how would he have known that in 600 BCE there were choruses of women and men? Did I say that? Choruses of women and girls, and that Sappho's songs are basically choral. That they're basically tied to ritual occasions. I like the way Sarah said it better than the way I say it now. So that's not there for Catullus. For Catullus, Sappho 31 is a poem, just as Catullus 51 is a poem. It's not a choral song, but I think he's extremely clever in appropriating the feelings of the female speaker, which are homoerotic feelings in Sappho 31, or they are when you look backwards in time from Catullus's point of view. I don't think they need to be from the point of view of 600 BCE. I mean, not. It's much more. It's much more generalized, a kind of emotional setting. But for Catullus, sure, there's somebody who's jealous of the beauty and the pleasure of another woman who's younger, who's the bride. But wait a minute. For Catullus, it's just another woman. And when Catullus chooses which woman is the love object, it's not the love object of Sappho, it's Sappho herself.
Mm-hmm. There's a question from YouTube. Someone watching there. Is Catullus also imitating what he would have known, perhaps more obviously, as Sappho's wedding poetry, such as 44, Song 44, the wedding of Hector and Andromache? Since Catullus wrote, for example, his song 64 about Thetis and Peleus.
Yeah. Well, certainly Catullus, that's a lovely question. Catullus was aware of wedding songs. So that's absolutely the case. I just don't think he really thought of Sappho 31 as a wedding song. He might have, but I think he was interested in the jealous fit that seems to be happening in the heart of the speaker of 31, the female speaker of 31. Lovely question.
Well, do we have any other questions from our group assembled here? Oh yeah, Astrid, I see that you have a question.
Yes. Do you think there is any relationship with Sappho's poem and courtly love, especially poem 31, since I see three motifs: the virginity, the triangle, and the object of love. And it seems for me there is courtly love is a reenactment of Sappho 31. Thank you.
Oh, I totally agree. I would say that we don't have to use the word courtly for the era of Catullus, but certainly when we think, for example, of the language of the troubadour, that's what we're talking about. And you know, I love the fact that in French, even today, if you look at words like honorem, okay, honneur, let's do another Latin word, odorem, odeur. How about this? Florem, flower, fleur. But when you go to amorem, it's not amour, it's amour, because French culture is so totally drenched in courtly love, and courtly love is the specialty of Southern French speakers. That's why even the Northern French, the standard French word for love is amour. And speaking of courtly love, you're so right. It almost requires triangles. And I love the fact that in French today, if you use the word amant, meaning lover, it's almost never the husband. So yes. There's nothing more fun to think with than courtly love traditions from the medieval period and working up. I also love the way in Petrarch, for example, who's a big experimenter in the early phases of Renaissance courtly love. I love the way that when it really catches on, the best practitioners are women poets who can channel men even better than men can channel women. So something that would be a lot of fun to do if you found those essays amusing is to take somebody like Petrarch and look how his courtly love models can be repurposed by known women poets. Lots of fun, endless fun. Thank you.
Well, Greg, I think you and I have in common having picked some bones with C.S. Lewis's allegory of love. You know, he disses Catullus and Propertius in his first chapter, not really having it. But yeah, you know, I studied Propertius and Catullus, and I decided he was wrong. Then I realized he himself realized he was wrong later on, that he never published a formal traction of the allegory of love.
Oh gosh.
But really, I think, you know, Propertius and Catullus are actually knocking off on Sappho. I mean, Sappho is really the inventor of subjective erotic poetry.
Exactly, and she's so good at it. Or if you like, I'll be more anthropological. Instead of being author centered, I'll say that the songs attributed to Sappho are perhaps the greatest example in all ancient Greek song culture of exactly this kind of poetics of love. I totally agree, and this means love of every type, every modulation, every color, homoerotic, heteroerotic, none of the above, sublime. You've got it. Everything is there in Sappho, and yes, there's Catullus, and then there's Propertius. I'd like to add two more characters, not characters, poets. Ovid, of course, and one thing that I'll be very interested in doing is having dialogues with some experts, and especially Heroides number 15 of Ovid, which is a kind of goodbye cruel world letter, quote unquote, composed by Sappho because of her unrequited love for pretty boy and solar hero Phaon, the radiant one. So let's make sure we include also Ovid, and then if I go backwards in time, I'm with you. I think Propertius could be just a treasure trove of further explorations along the lines of what we've been trying to do together here today. But how about Tibullus? Not bad. And in the last book of Tibullus, there are these amazing poems attributed to a fun-loving girl called Sulpicia. And for the longest time, the general view was that Sulpicia can't be a real person, that it must be an old guy like us channeling the feelings of young girls, and that Sulpicia is really a male appropriation. I'm now ready to think that she really was a kind of Roman Sappho in her own right. And okay, it might not be quite as high and quite as deep. It might be more like Leslie Gore, where it's my party and I'll cry if I want to, but I like that stuff too. But thank you for that lovely, lovely invitation to go further. And I totally agree with you. We can't just stop with Tertullus. Let's just keep going with Propertius. I would add Tibullus. I would add Sulpicia, and then to top it all off, Mr. Love himself, Ovid, the naughtiest of all love poets.
Well, you know, Ovid in the Heroides is knocking off on Propertius's letter of Arethusa in Lycotes in book 4 of Propertius's Elegy. Propertius would just do like one gem, Jane Austen, and then Ovid here writes, you know, a whole book, you know, the genre. But Sappho is the only non-mythological character in the Heroides, and that's where I come back to your larger than life idea of the poet.
Yes. Okay. Could I say something, however, that Sappho becomes so big that she might as well be mythologized. You know, if you're going to be hopelessly in love with a mythological figure like Phaon, who is a solar boy, he really is, and I can't think of him as a real guy. By real guy, I mean a historical guy. Then certainly Sappho herself can be carried off into the realm of being a figure of myth. After all, what she does when she dives off the white rock is something that Aphrodite has already done. Well, of course, Aphrodite is a goddess, and she's not going to get killed by diving into the gray, watery depths below. But maybe Sappho didn't either die, so to speak, because she has such an obsession with the planet Venus, who is, of course, the planet Aphrodite, and diving after the sun is like presenting yourself with the hope that morning comes, the planet Venus comes up from the horizon, and guess who is in tow? It's Sappho. Who knows?
And you know, talking about increasing the number of names, a lot of them we just don't have the works anymore. Varro and his Leucadia. Another Aphrodite girl. We just don't have.
Oh, I agree. We've lost so much. We've lost so much, but at least we have courtly love in the medieval and Renaissance period. So at least we can make up for lots and lots of either direct or indirect reception. And I don't even care if it's indirect.
Well, with Petrarch, we know he directly knew Propertius, the parent,
Oh yeah.
and he loved.
Yeah. He had these Latin love poets hardwired in his head and his heart, I would say. Yes. Yeah.
Maria, I saw that you had a question.
Yes, Greg, thank you very much for this travel towards in the classical reception of Sappho. I just wanted to ask your view about what we may call the female reception of Sappho during the Hellenistic age, and I'm referring particularly to one name you already know. It's the female poetess Gnosis.
Yes.
So since we have mentioned all other names, I would like to ask your view, to tell us your view on that particular poetess. Thank you very much.
Yes, I'm a big fan of Gnosis, and thank you so much for mentioning her. I think I would have woken up in the middle of the night saying, "Oh my God, we never talked about Gnosis." So thank you, dear Maria. Yes, very important. And you know what? I'll even go further back in time. Well, who knows whether it's further back in time, but Corinna, meaning little girl, the Boeotian poetess, as she's sometimes called. I think she's another important figure to reckon with. People get too wound up, I think, about the date of Corinna. What's more important is that, sure, it's a fact of life that her songs are not in the Alexandrian canon. And why? I think it's because her songs were not in the Athenian canon of songs performed by citharodes in the 5th and 4th centuries. So, of course, she's not in that, but she's very important, whether she's pre-Hellenistic or Hellenistic. So thank you so much.
There's a question here coming in from the chat on YouTube. How about Theocritus, Idyll 2 and 11, and their relationship with Sappho?
Well, even aside from 2 and 11, later on in the collection, there are poems. And here I'll say poems, not songs, because we're dealing with a Hellenistic author, that are actually spelled in the local writing tradition, the local literary writing tradition of Sappho and Alcaeus. So Theocritus is a faithful transmitter, not only in content, as in the case of 2 and 11, but also in form even. So a very important transmitter. I totally agree. It's just that, unfortunately, well, maybe not so unfortunate, the Aeolic forms in Theocritus tend to gravitate more to Alcaeus, the male side of lesbian tradition, and not to Sappho, the female side. But yes, this is such a big field, and those essays that I shared with you are simply a very small representation of, I think, the kind of things we can do if and here's my big takeaway, that we should concentrate not only on imitations of imitations, but also situations where the imitator or appropriator goes all the way back to the original. And if we can sort that out, I think we might have a bigger heritage of Sappho than we had ever hoped for.
Well, that would be a wonderful outcome.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Our hour is about up.
Well, I hope that our conversation continues, and Keith will be managing what is potentially a very tricky minefield of 123 paragraphs, where I tried to set out at least some of the directions in which we go, but it's so incomplete what I've offered you so far. It's mind-bogglingly incomplete, and we're still left with the bittersweet sadness that most of the songs of Sappho have disappeared for us. I only wish that there were new papyrus finds that match the excitement of the so-called brother song, which I prefer to call the sister song.
Well, Greg, thank you for joining us.
Thank you all, and thank you for your patience with my my inability to cope with the technological challenges.
Yes, we had some technical difficulties.
We made up for it.
Beginning, but
we made up for it.
All right. Thank you all out there, and see you next time.
See you. Bye.